Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. I am Mr. Kadim Khan and I am a lecturer in the Institute of Computing, KUST University of Science and Technology. Today we will take lecture number 21 of the subject of visual programming, in which we are going to discuss the user-defined control in Visual C#.NET. Dear students, the user-defined controls is used to combine or group the existing controls to make our own control, and that controls provides us great reusability for the code. We have not to redesign and recode the user-defined control once we have designed and implemented in the first time, and we can use that user-defined control so many times in our form or in our other forms in the existing project. So here in this lectures we are uh, discussing the user-defined control in the C#.NET with the help of the programming example. This is the discussion agenda. It contains the topics of what is the user-defined control. Then we have the user-defined control and MVC, that is the resemblance with the MVC of the user-defined controls. Then we will discuss the user-defined controls in the C#.NET, why we are creating the user-defined controls in the .NET framework, and the advantages of user-defined controls. Then we have the multiple steps which are used to create the user-defined control in the Visual C#.NET. And at the end we will provide you the practical example of the user-defined control in the Visual C#.NET. What is the user-defined controls? Basically, the user-defined control is also called user controls only. It is the simplest types of the controls and that provide you the code reusability. User-defined controls are simply the user controls are inherited from the system class and window, which is the child of the system, and form, which is also the child of the Windows class, and then we have the user control class. So user-defined controls are inherited from the user control class, and their top parent is the system class. And basically the user-defined controls follows the model of the composition. In the compositions, we have composed the data and functions with each other. So here we bound the data and the function access that particular data in the composition. The composition is very strong concepts in object-oriented programming. So in compositions, when one class has one or more associations or a reference of other objects in that class. For example, in one class we declare one or more objects, and then through the objects we can access the functions of the other classes. Composition is also called as an association, in which we has multiple associations with other classes. For example, in compositions, when we say that the car has the engine, so engine is the composition of the car, and the car has multiple other parts, so all parts makes the car. So that's why in the compositions we can access the other objects of the other classes, and then through their objects we can access the function and data of their classes. Usually the user control combines more than one control in the logical unit. Means that we can combine multiple existing controls in a one user controls. For example, when we have group of text boxes for entering address informations, and all these informations are necessary in another forms as well. So we will design one user defines control or a user control, and then we can drag drop that particular control into many places in other forms or in the existing forms. Now user defined control or user controls has a relations with the MVC as well. MVC is modular view controller framework. Basically in MVC architecture we have first model, then we have the controller, and then we have the view. We can also first create the view as well, and then we will create the controller, and at the end we will create the model. For example, in the MVC, first this is the graphical user interface where the user will interact with the graphical user interface. Then the user will provides users commands are the actions to the controller class, and the controller class will be the user defines control or a user control here, which contains the logic or the programming steps required to perform the functionality for the user, and then the controller will communicate with the model here. For example, this may be certain database models or the XML model. So when the controller will communicate with the model will provide information or the notification to the controller. So the model cannot interact directly with the view. Here, the model will provide information to the controller, and then the controller will provide the information to the graphical user interface where the user will interact with that particular user interface here. Similarly, the user-defined control also works the same. So first, our graphical user interface will interacts with the user-defined controls. The user controls will interact with the model. The model may be the code or the database or the XML files or any other structure or the external files or systems, and then the information will be provided back to the controllers. The controller will process the information which contains actually the our code, and then the information will be provided to the graphical user interface where the user will interact with that information. So MVC and user defined controls has the same relations like this, but user defined controls, in fact, it works on the local level, means that it can work in a one project or in the cross project as well. But MVC is more advanced. That means that MVC will work on the online systems. For example, when you have the remote database and the control is also maybe the remote, and then your interface connect with the controls, and then controls will be used here with the interface here. So that is in fact important concepts used in the user defined control and the MVC here. Now, how we can use the user defined control? First, the user defined control can be created as like another unit. For example, in the C#.NET projects, you will right click on the test app here, which is the second options in the solution explorer. When you right click here, then you have to add the user defined control. So add new item, then you will select the user controls. When you will select the user control, you will be provided with the form which will be without the title bar. So then you will design your controls there, and you will also required to implement the logic of the programs in the user defined control, and then you can drag drop that control from the toolbox onto your form so many times that you have required. So user defined controls are the control developed by the programmer for multiple usage. For example, you can drag drop the controls here, and you can also drag drop another instance of the controls here, like the associations when you create the multiples objects of a class or of the different classes. Also, you can drag drop that control so many times on the same form or on the different forms as well. So programmer can drag drop these controls so many times as up to their needs on the same or on the different forms here. Now, as you see the example of the user defined control, so what are the reasons for creating the user defined controls? The main reason is this, that it saves it sometimes the existing control of the graphical user interface doesn't fulfill our requirements, and we need our own control which we develop from the existing controls. For example, the GUI controls, they don't provide us the required functionality. We have to combine all these controls together so that we can in fact create our own user defined controls. For example, in the C++, the built-in function doesn't work for us. So that's why we have to redesign our own functions so that we can use them. So we can create the user-defined control, which gives us the advantage of high cohesion and low coupling here. So in the high cohesion, we keep all related components together, while in the low coupling, we in fact separates all those components which are unrelated with each other, and we will make separations or distance between them. So this is a golden rule in software developments in which we obtain the code reusability, and also we obtain relationship between different components in our program. Now, what is the advantage of the user-defined controls? The first advantage is the code reusability. The code reusability means that the code can be reused many times in the existing project. Also, it can provide code modularization. In the code modularization, we have the concepts of modularized programming. For example, we have multiple modules in our software, so we can in fact controls each and every modules in the isolation fashion. Also, it saves the time. Saves time means that we can reuse the code. So once we have done the code, then we can reuse that particular piece of code so many times in our project. So this saves the programmer's time. Also, it saves the efforts of the program. Means that fewer people are required to design the user controls, and once they are designed, then we can use that control so many times in our project. Also, these are there is easy to find the bugs and fix it. Once you have refined your existing controls or the user defined controls, then you can use that control so many times onto your forms or in your projects. Now means that this will reduce the chance of bugs and errors in the systems. It also saves the memory as well, because the computer will compile and run the app once the user defined controls, because here we are using the reusability, so then we can also use the memory usability, and the memory is the cache memory. Means that the computer program will become more faster because it reduces the memory utilization. Now, these are the steps for creating the user-defined controls. First, we have to right-click on the project in the Solution Explorer, and then you have to add new items. And when you click on the add new items, you have to select the user control. When you select the user control, then the user control will be displayed, and then you have to design and run your user control. Once you have designed and run your user control, then you can drag drop that particular control on your form as you want. So first you have to create the Windows applications here. Then in the Windows application, you have to add new item and new user controls there. Now we will show you the practical steps here. For example, this is our form. This is the Windows application form. Here you will right click on this C# Windows form application form 5. Then when you will right click there, for example here, then you will be asked to create the user's controls. So when you will redesign the user control, it will appear here. And once you have done the complete code here, you can drag drop that control onto your form. So you can be able to provide the code reusability as well, as it saves your times of the development, and also it make the program very much efficient. Now here we are performing the example of computing the square root, and the logarithm of a number by using the user defined controls. So first we will create the user defined control, then we have to design the controls, and then we will implement the code behind that controls. So for this purpose you need to drag drop the required graphical user interface components from the toolbox, and then you will click on the calculate button to create the event, and once you have perform all the coding, then you will recompile these controls by clicking start buttons, that is the green buttons here. When it will be compiled, then you will drag drop that control from the toolbox onto your form. So this example takes first number, and when you select the particular options here, for example the squares, square of 2 is 4, similarly the square of 10 is 100. If you have selected square root, then it will calculate the square root and the results will be displayed here. And when you have selected the logarithm, then it will compute the logarithm here. When you click on the calculate button, then the results will be displayed here. This is the logic of the user defined controls. For our example, when you double click on the buttons, then the Visual Studio C#.NET will create the event for us. And the event is the private function. Private means that it is only accessible within the project. Void means that it doesn't return anything. And button1 underscore click is the name of the event. It is the click event of the button1. In fact, this is the function here. And the function has the body as well. And there are two parameters in the functions. Here, the object sender represents the instance of the object which is sending the event. And here, the button1 is sending the event. While event args E represents the data of the event, means that what sort of data will be sent through this event by the sender object of the button1. E represents the buttons. In the previous lectures, when we have done the program for blocking the keyboard, we have accessed the ASCII key of characters of the keyboard, that is E.key character. So E represents the data which will be sent through the event. But here, mostly E represents the buttons on the keyboard which will be pressed there. Now this is the body of the loop, that is the buttons one underscore click event. First of all, the data will be taken from the text box and it will be typecast into integer because the text box provides us the text data. Then the data will be assigned to the n1. N1 is the name of the variable, which is the integer variable. Now if first radio button is checked, that means that if the first option is selected which perform the power, then second text box dot text is equal to math dot power n1 comma 2 dot 2 strings. That means that here the math class function power will be called. Here the power is the function of the math class, math is the built-in class, and it takes two parameters n1 comma 2. N1 is the number here which is the integer, and 2 represents its well calculate the power of 2. For example, power of 3 is equal to 9 with 2. 3 power 2 is equal to 9. 3 multiplied 3 is equal to 9. And dot to strings will convert that back to strings because text box, second text box dot text property takes the strings here. Similarly, if radio button 2 dot check text box 2 dot text is equal to math dot square root and 1 comma 2 strings, it will simply perform the square root when the second radio button is checked. So square root is again like the power function, but it is also inherited from the math, but it will take only one parameter because square root requires only one parameter. Like the square root of 9 is equal to 3. And it will be typecast to strings because the second text box also takes the string data. Similarly, if the third radio button is checked, then the math.log function will be called. Log function is the logarithm function of the math class, and it takes only one parameter, and that parameter will be in fact converted into logs, and the result will be typecasted to strings because textbox2.text function, that is the controls, it takes the strings here, and then the body of the loop, the event is completed. Now after when you need to compile and run the applications so that the code here will be compiled and the user control will be changed. So when you have compiled and run, then these controls will appear here on the toolbox. That is the user control 1. You can drag drop that control onto the form and then you will run the application so that it will provide you the functionalities. You can also drag drop this control onto the other form as well. If you have multiple forms, so you can drag drop these controls on the other form as well. So exactly, it is like the composition of the objects. When you have multiple objects on and that objects are in fact called and defined and called in the another class here. For example, user control 1 is like one of the objects and we have created multiple instances of this user defined controls there, and exactly it gave you the idea of the composition, which is the has a associations, like we says that computer has a hard disk, means that this full program has a computational parts which will compute the square root and the log functions. So this is like the association. Now when you will compile and run this application, you will see the output like this. So unlike the existing controls, you need to perform the code again and again. But when you drag drop these controls two times or more than two times, so you do not requires the code and designing again. Just first time when you have designed the code and the programming, that means that you have designed the GUI and the programming, so that first times is sufficient and just you need to drag drop so many times that controls onto your form. So this gives you the advantage of the flexibility, reusability of the code. Similarly, when that user defines controls has certain error, you have eliminated that errors and just now that control is clean from all sort of the errors, so then you just drag drop, so you do not recheck or retest the other controls because initial controls was tested, so that's why it gives you the good idea of the software quality. So by using user defined controls, you can use the existing controls and you can design and develop your own controls here. Now, dear students, we will perform this example in the Visual Studio so that you get complete knowledge about the user defined controls. So for this purpose, click on the escape button. So when you click the escape button, you need to launch the Visual Studio. So type here the Visual Studio. So there is my Visual Studio. I'm using the latest version of the Visual Studio 2019, which is so far the latest version. So click on it. When you click on it, meanwhile the Visual Studio will be launched for you. This is the splash screens of the Visual Studio 2019. After this screens, you will be asked to create the new project in the Visual Studio. You need to create the Windows application, and also you need to select the Visual C Sharp. These are the existing projects that we have developed so far. So for this course, you need to create a new project here. Just click here. When you will click here, the Visual Studio is now going to create the Windows application for us. Now Visual Studio is creating the project for us. You have seen the bars of the progress. Here you need to select the project types. For example, all project type, that is good. Now you can also change the platforms here if you are using the Android programming, Azure, iOS programming, Linux, Mac operating system, TV operating system, and Windows Xbox. Just you need to change the language here. So change that language to C Sharp. When you have changed the language, you have to drag that types of projects to the downwards. So then clicks the Windows Forms apps from here. and click on the next buttons. Now provide the name of the project here. For example, by default it is Windows Form Apps 11 because already we have created apps 10, so that's why this is the by default name, Windows Forms Apps 11. You need to type the meaningful name here. For example, I will type that user control calculation. Here I type the user control calculation, clicks on the create button. When you will click on the create button, now Visual Studio is in fact going to create the project of the Windows applications, the name of the user's control calculation. Now Visual Studio is, you can see that it will be created by the Visual Studio. This is the progress. Visual Studio has created an empty form for us, and when I click on the toolbox, that is the toolbox here, there is no toolbox. So for this purpose, if you want to um, explore the toolbox, so here click on the toolbox. Now you can see that toolbox is here. So there is no the user defined controls currently for us, so we have to create our own control. So for this purpose, go to Solution Explorer. You need to right click here, right click on the second option, not on the first option. This is user control calculation, where you can see the C# icon. Right click here, click on the add, and you can select save the user control here. You can also select for user control from the new items. So if this is not available here, then you will click on the new item, and here you need to select the user's control. This is the user control. User control name is user control1.cs, which is, and its extension is this .cs, means that it is the C# extension. So here we will set calculator.cs and click on the add button. When you click on the add button, you can see another form, but this is the borderless and also the titleless form. Just you resize the form here. I have resized that. Now you need to drag drop the existing controls from the common controls onto this user controls. So first I am dragging dropping one buttons controls, then go to the toolbox, also drag drop one text box control, and then also you need to drag drop one label controls here, that enter first value or enter a value here. Also I need one radio buttons controls. I can copy and paste all these controls so many times where I require. So first of all, this is a label. I will click on the label. Also I will select both of them through clicking the control key and by clicking with the mouse. Control C means that you can copy here, copy, and you can paste it here, so that another instance of these controls will be created here. Now click on the labels controls, go to the property and write here that enter a number, or enter a value. That's good. Enter a number. Okay. Here I will type result. Change its property to the result. Result. Okay. That is the result. Now this redo buttons, which is the redo button 1, go to the text property. First redo button will compute the square. Square. Click on this button, copy it, and then paste it. You can use the shortcut keys as well. Again paste it, Okay, and now click on the second redo button. Write it here, the square root. Okay, and select this redo button. Go to the property, logarithm. Okay, now click on this buttons controls and click here. Also change the property that redo buttons controls calculate. It will calculate the results when you select one of the three options. Now my designing is now complete. You can do further designing as well. For example, if you want to change the color property, etc. For example, I want to make these two labels green. So go up and select the far color and click on the customs and click on this green. So number. Okay. So here you can change the text property of this label as well. You need to select one of them. So here, and you should be small. It is number. Okay, you can also change the color of these radio buttons by selecting all of them combinedly. Go to font color property, far color property, that is you can select the from the web as well. For example, that can be red, so you see that now it is red. And similarly I can also change the buttons text property, that is the font color property. Click here and want that hot track. Now designing is complete. Now I need to add the logic behind these controls. So click on the calculate button so that you will be able to create the event. This is the event which is created, and the event is button1 underscore click private void button1 underscore object sender event argse. This is the private function. In fact, this event is a function, means that it is a private and it is only accessible within this class. It doesn't returns anything. That means that it has a void data types, and the name of the event is button1 underscore click. Object sender means the control responsible for the sending the event, which is the button1, and event args means that E means that the data which will be sent to the event to the event controller. Now here I have to write the code here. You can copy this code as well from the slides to save the times, but also you can do it your own coding here. So first of all, I need to read the data. For example, int n is equal to int others. Letters text data will be taken from the first text box and it will be typecasted to integer. Now here I will use the if statement. So if first redo button is clicked, then the square function will be redo button dot checked. So its first redo button is checked, then the second text box dot text is equal to, here the math class function will be called math dot power, means that it is forming the power square root, the square, that is n comma 2, in that will calculate the power that two strings. Okay, so first we have done programming for the first preview buttons. Similarly, if the second review button is selected here, that is the second review button that checked. If second review button is checked, then the text box dot text is equal to math dot square root. We are now performing the square root of n, square root of n, that to string. And if the third value button is checked here, value button 3 dot checked, then text dot text is equal to math dot logarithm function of n. And also it's required to be backcasted strings because the text box 2, that is the second text box, is the string data. Now you can see that our logic is now complete. This is the designs and this is the logic here, that means program logic. So our programming is now completed. Now we need to compile it. So for this purpose, go to the debug and start debugging. Click on start debugging. You can also compile that user-defined controls from directly clicking here, but when you will click here, it will execute the form as well. So just we have compiled that user-defined controls here. Now you can see that there this is the error sections, but there is no errors. When I compiled, you can see that the form is also compiled and you have seen the form here. This is the output. But to view this user defined control, you need to drag drop this control onto your form here. So for this purpose, now go to the toolbox here. Now when you have view this toolbox, you can see that the user defined control is now available here after compiling this project. So you can drag drop that controls onto your forms here. For example, this is the first instance. Again, click on the toolbox. This is the second instance of this controls, which is the user defined. Similarly, you can drag drop this control so many times onto your form here. Okay, for example, I have drag drop 3 times this control onto my form. Now to view the functionality or to use this functionality, just you need to click and compile the project here. Now you will see the output. This is the output here. For example, if I provide you some input here, I want to provide the input to my user defined control. For example, the 9 square of 9 is 81. You can see square of root of 9 is now 3 and square that is log of 9 is 2 point something. You can use another instance of this control as well. Square of 100 is 10,000, square root of 100 is this, and so on. Similarly, you can use this as well. Now what will happen? For example, I have drag drop 3 times this controls here. Now what will happen if I make some changes here? For example, go here and now I'm making some changes here. I want to add another button here which will clear these 2 text boxes. So select this and paste it. Now the another instance of the button has now created. You can also drag drop new buttons here. So just I copied it and pasted it here so that another option is available as this is now button 2. You can see this is the button 2 and here I will write it clear text boxes. Now double click here, this will clear the text box. So also it will clear first text box dot clear function. This will clear the text box. Similarly, also I want to clear the second text box. I will write here the clear. this will make it clear. By making it clear, I mean that it will make the text boxes empty. Now again, for example, if I will go here, you can see that there is just one button here, while in this control I have also created another buttons here. So for this purpose, again you need to compile the and run the example. Now you can see that automatically the another instance button is also appear here. So for example, 20 square of that is the square of 20 is 400. When I will click here, that is clear button, you can see now it's working. So once you've made the changes in the existing or original controls, automatically all the changes will reflect here. So that means that it is the code reusability and it saves the time of the programmer as well. Well, when you design your own controls, so that gives you a good advantage of code reusability as well. So this was the topic of the today. Now we will resume our slides here. So, dear student, this is the end of the lecture. If you want to read more about these topics, you can study these two books. The first book is the Reference Professional C# 5.0 and the .NET 4.5 frameworks. This is the expert's voice in the .NET 6 edition by Kendall Editions. Also, we have Learn C# Fast, the ultimate course book from beginners to advanced. You can study these two books for your topics and it will give you more ideas. Also, if you have any questions, you can ask the questions to the email. My email is m.kadeem@kust.edu.pk. I will wait for your question and answers as soon as I get them. Thank you very much.